Welcome to FailCraft, the podcast where we dive into the messy, real side of success and explore how setbacks become the stepping stones to growth and clarity. I'm your host, Ezekiel Iferia, and today's guest is Michael Cappa. Society often tells a very specific story about success. Go to university, get a degree, sit at a desk. If you work with your hands, that is often framed as plan B. Michael challenged that narrative. He started as a student painter and built Altona Painting into a powerhouse business. But his biggest hurdle wasn't finding clients, it was fighting the voice in his own head. He openly admits that he had to crush the self-limiting beliefs that told him he couldn't build something big. He's here to talk about the stigma failure of the trades, why a fresh coat of paint is the highest ROI investment you can make, and how to stop thinking like a laborer and start thinking like a CEO. So, Michael, it's an honor to welcome you to FieldCraft. Thank you very much for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Ezekiel. I'm looking forward to having a conversation with you here.
Great to have you here. So, Michael, let's dive in. You mentioned that you started as a student painter and you had to crush the self-limiting beliefs to build your business. I'd like to know what were some of those limiting beliefs that you had to overcome?
Yeah, so there were definitely a few major self-limiting beliefs that were in my way, per se, or I was putting in my own way. And the first one was that I was playing small. And what I mean by this is when I first started my so let me backpedal a little bit.
Mm.
When I was 18, I did a student painting franchise after my first year of college, and that was actually quite successful. I ran a $90,000 business in the summer of 2015 at the age of 18 years old. Ezekiel, this was my first real taste of entrepreneurship. I had agency, I had what felt like freedom. I was in the driver's seat of my income, and I felt like I was stepping into the next version of myself from this punk ass teenage high schooler now transitioning into a young adult. And that the success I generated from that summer actually mostly paid for my second year at college in terms of my room and board and my tuition. So, not so much a failure, but it was actually a really big success. So, fast forward to 2018 when I started my own painting business, which is called Altona Painting. Now, I've been doing that consistently for 8 years. We as human beings, we like to operate within our comfort zone. And when I started my own painting business, I was only doing brush and roll interior and exterior painting. So I wasn't taking on there's so many different things you can do with painting. For example, you can do spray painting, you can do kitchen cabinets, you can do commercial painting, you
Right.
can do wallpapering and popcorn ceiling removal. So there's so many different types of, and I'm sure you've heard of epoxy flooring as well. So there's so many different types of coatings and decorating sub trades that you can even do within painting. And one of my biggest failures from the first few years that I was in business was that I was averse to trying any of those other sub trades. I only did what I was familiar and comfortable with. I didn't want to step outside my comfort zone. And looking back on that, that really hurt me because what happened was the first few years I was in business for myself, I should say, I started to gain traction and gain momentum. But oftentimes when people would call me, they'd say, "Hey, Michael, do you do popcorn ceiling removal? Do you guys paint kitchen cabinets?" And people were asking for services that I just was completely closed minded to. So I can't quantify it. I can't go back and say, like, oh, yeah, I definitely left like $50,000 on the table. Honestly, it's probably more than that. But over the course of the first few years that I was in business, I was averse to trying new things and I only did what I was comfortable with. And that definitely hindered me because I not only did I leave money on the table, but it goes beyond that. Business is about relationships and referrals and networking. And people buy from people. And I'm sure you've heard the saying, your network is your net worth. So when I was turning down projects for services that I wasn't offering at the time, and I was closed-minded to offering them, that's the key here. Back to your question of what was a setback. The setback was that I was closed-minded to trying new things, and I think that stemmed from a fear of failure. And not only did I lose out on the revenue and the monetary reward of doing those services, I do them now, but at that time, I also missed out on building the relationship with those clients. And then all the second and third and fourth tier potential referrals and relationship building I would have done from those projects hypothetically.
All
So
right. Thank you very much for sharing that story with us, Michael. So you advocate for the next generation to enter the trades. So do you think the system is failing young people by, giving the impression or, telling them that skilled labor is failure? So why are we so afraid of, getting our hands dirty?
it's a really great question. Let me unpack that as succinctly as I can.
Mm-hmm.
so so the education system is okay. I'm going to do my best to be very on point with this and quick. So,
Mm-hmm.
my story was that when I was in grade 11, so here in North America, it's very similar between Canada and the United States. So, when you get to 11th grade, which at that time you're about 16, 15, 16 years old, the secondary school starts to pigeonhole you or funnel you into your learning stream so that you can pick the right courses in your final years of secondary school. And then universities and colleges look at your marks from your final years at school, and then you get accepted into the programs you want to do. So, why is that relevant? That's relevant because when I was in my second last year of secondary school, one of our guidance counselors who was responsible for helping the students pick their courses based on the career path they wanted to choose. The way that he presented it to us, I think, was very what's the word I'm looking for? He was bashing on the trades, or he was unintentionally slighting the trades or blue collar work, because what he did was he showed us, like a XY line graph with time, and basically he said if you go to college or skilled trades college to learn to be like an electrician or a carpenter or a plumber, he demonstrated on the graph that statistically speaking, on average, you're going to make more in the short term but less in the long term. And then vice versa, he showed us a graph where if you go to university, that you would make less in the short term but more in the long term. But these are averages, right? And that's kind of what that's how he presented it to my peers and I. And he's just doing his job. He was just doing what he was told and presenting us the different options. But I think that there's more at play with funneling students into the post-secondary system, specifically in universities, because universities cost more. Like, it costs more to go to the University of Toronto than it does to go to like a skilled trades college here in Canada. So there's more money to be made. There's more profit to be made for the universities because they get more subsidies from the government, and then they also charge the students more because it's there's a ratio between how much the government subsidizes and how much students pay to get in to study, and there's an incentive to funnel students into the university stream from secondary schools. So that's reason number one. Reason number two is I think it's very much a we live in the information age now, and the industrial age was basically from like the mid 1700s till sometime in the 20th century, maybe like World War II, we'll say, before like digital technology really started to take off. And I think an industrial age type of thinking or line of thought or paradigm is that the trades, like, there's white collar work and blue collar work. There's this social hierarchy around people who work in an office and
Mm,
are on the C-suite of companies and who are at the managerial level, doing like white collar work in a suit and tie, versus people who are working with their hands, who are building things and in the trades. So I think there's still this like long standing, like your whole podcast is about the stigma around failing and failure, and
yeah.
I think there's still outstanding or long-standing stigma around the trades. And I think that stigma is reducing significantly now because we're realizing that there's a massive shortage of people in the trades and we need more of them. There's actually been more like funding and public relations campaigns from governments here in the Western world to promote young people to get into the trades. So the stigma is definitely shrinking, but still, I still think there's a little bit. Um, one example I'll give, and then we'll move on here. One of my mentors, he's a contractor, and he actually went to school for a commerce degree. And we were out for dinner a couple months ago, and he was telling me that his father was very proud of him when he did his commerce degree and he started working
Mm.
in the bank, but he was also a painter. So he would work at the bank during the day. And then on the evenings and weekends, he would work as a painter painting. And then he eventually decided to become a contractor. And his father apparently just completely became infuriated and was like, "Why are you becoming a contractor? You have a perfectly good job at the bank." And he went on to become a very successful contractor and real estate investor, and now he's in private lending. And that all stemmed from him going into the trades. But if he just stuck the safe route of having a safe job at the bank versus taking a risk and starting his contracting business, he never would have built the life that he has. And that's why he's such a powerful mentor to me. But my point there is like his father was upset with him that he transitioned from his white collar banking job to become a contractor. So I still think there's this stigma around it.
All right, Michael. So, we all know this stereotype of the contractor who doesn't show up or, doesn't pick his or her call. So, that's indeed a failure of trust. So, how do you build a system that ensures your clients never feel abandoned?
Plain and simple, Ezekiel, it's practicing good business ethics with your clients. People ultimately, with customer service, people want to be taken care of. People want to be communicated with. They want to know what they're paying for, and they want to know why you were the right choice, why you were their right choice to work with. And as long as you keep in regular communication with people, and you review the scope of work, and while you're doing the work, you kind of show them what you're doing and your process, and then at the end of it you review it with them, and if they have any questions or if there's any deficiencies, then you just you take it from a team approach. And it's if I could kind of wrap this all in a beautiful bow, it's how would you, if you were working at your grandmother's house for any trade, plumbing, painting, building a fence, whatever it is, if it was your grandmother, how would you treat your grandmother, right? So if you treat every client like they're a family member, then that will serve tradespeople really well.
All right, Michael, for the young person who is listening right now, who do not like school and wants to work with their hands, but they are afraid of disappointing their parents. So what's the one thing they need to do to, what the one thing they need to tell them to prove that the trades are actually a winning career?
It's a very good question. Ultimately, people's parents want the best for their children. And I think oftentimes what ends up happening, there's a few things. So, number one, just like we internally have a fear of failure for ourselves, our parents have a fear of failure that they're impressing upon us as their children. So they care for you and they love you so much and they want to see you do well and they don't want to see you fail and they don't want to see you get hurt. And that's all well and good. That's very important, right? Part of the human condition is sometimes it's learning things the hard way. And and it's also trial by fire or or baptism by fire, whatever expression you want to use there. Usually how it is. You got to try a bunch of different things before you figure out what you like and what you don't like. And for a young person who is passionate about working with their hands or doing something that's not like a white collar job per se. Like let's say your parents want you to become a doctor or a lawyer or an accountant, but you really like working on cars. Then a few things. Number one, actions speak louder than words. Looking back on my teenage years, I was always working multiple jobs. Now, I did actually like school. I actually did do well in school, but there were some subjects that once I realized what I liked and what I didn't like, I just kind of stopped caring about the subjects I didn't like. But I also excelled, like got straight A's, A pluses at the subjects I did like. So, what I would suggest to your audience is lean into very positive actions because your parents will observe, hey, my son or my daughter is going to the gym, they're eating healthy, they're taking care of themselves, they're reading a lot more, that group of friends that they used to hang out with that I thought was not good for them or a bad influence on them. I can see now that they're hanging out with better people. Just through you raising your frequency and elevating yourself, that's like step one, because through osmosis of you elevating your frequency and doing better, your parents will already start to lower that guard of insecurity, that that fear of failure that they might be impressing upon you. Number two is, most people are very reasonable. They eventually do come around. They might not like it in the moment, but what I have seen to be successful for my peers is when they just have a calm, cool, collected, and upfront conversation with their parents and say, hey, listen, like I know you want this for me and I wish I could give that to you, but this is where my heart lies. This is where my interests lie. I think I can come up with a really good plan of how to be successful. Like let's say your parents want you to become a doctor, but you really like racing cars or like you like working on trucks or I don't know, some sort of trade. Communicate that to them. Just say, listen, this makes me happy. I love working with my hands. I love seeing the fruits of my labor. And, this brings me a lot of joy. I think if I sought out the proper mentorship and came up with a coherent plan with how I can be successful at this long term, would that help alleviate your insecurity around me not becoming a doctor? So, your parents ultimately just want what's best for you, but sometimes what they think is best for you is not actually what's best for you. Usually we know, eventually we come to know what is best for us. We might not know it right in the moment, but we do come around. And for your teenage audience who is listening to this, um, I'm 29 years old and I read a lot and I study a lot and I went to school, so my vocabulary and my worldview and my paradigm and my perspective has expanded tremendously. But when I was a teenager, I wouldn't be able to, like, what I'm verbalizing and what I'm communicating to you, I'd be feeling inside, but I wouldn't be able to say it. And I think what I would say, what I would cap this thought off to your audience is like really dig deep, because maturity comes with time and you might not be able to verbalize what's on your mind, but just kind of live in that feeling of like what lights your fire, what excites you, and then reflect a little deeper on like how you can maturely verbalize that to your parents or people in your world that might want something different for you.
All right, all right. So, Michael, I have a personal question for you. After transitioning from a student painter to a thought leader and business owner, I'd like to know what does being successful truly mean to you now?
It means a few things. Number one, when people seek out my knowledge and seek out my service for painting over other people's expertise and their service for painting, that that's very important to me. So that's one way I feel successful. Another way I feel successful is Maya Angelou has this amazing quote, and I'm paraphrasing, but it's essentially it's not what you do, but it's how you make people feel. And I know that like most of my business is referrals and repeat customers. So I must be making people feel real good about themselves or good about the experience of working with me if they keep coming back to want to work with me. And then the last thing I would say, you know, in terms of people think that success is just solely monetary or financial. And that's very important, of course. You have to be making more than you're spending and also keeping, right? But I would also say I feel successful in other areas of my life. You know, financially, like I'm okay. I could, you know, things are definitely on an upward trajectory, but everything I've made, I've put right back into my business. But where I've been very extremely successful is in my relationships with people in my world, my family, my friends, and all my professional colleagues. I feel like I have very strong relationships with those people, and you know, to wrap that up in a beautiful bow is relationships are everything. And I think people in your audience will feel successful when they know that they have a strong inner circle and they have a strong tribe of people who, you know, they can call up and rely upon and feel that they're supported and accepted.
All right, all right. So finally, Michael, for our listeners who want to connect with you, follow your work, or just say hi to continue this conversation later. So where is the best place for them to go?
Yeah, so a couple places. My company Instagram is at Altona Painting. Altona is Altona, and you can follow me on social media there. On my website, altonapainting.com, right on the homepage, there's a ebook for download. So if any of your audience would like to learn about the trade of painting, then they can download that book. And it's a really good little 30-page, like it's a very quick read, like maybe 20 to 30-minute read at most. And it's a good introduction to painting. And the last place you can find me, my friends, is my personal Instagram, which is at underscore Michael Cappa. And if you're looking for epic drum videos, I don't know if your audience might not be able to see the video feed here, but behind me on screen, I have a big, huge drum kit. So, you know, you got to keep that creative side alive. And I'm a drummer. So if you want to watch any of my drumming videos, you can find them at underscore Michael Kappa on Instagram.
All right, Michael, it's been a really interesting time having a conversation with you, and I am very excited to have you on the show today.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Ezekiel. It was a real pleasure.